And I'm back. Greetings, everyone. Sorry for the bit of a delay. There has been some small technical glitch. Welcome, everyone, to episode 3 of Freedom Alternative Interviews. I'm here with Mr. Sid Lukkassen from the Netherlands. Mr. Lukkassen is a city councilor from the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy in the Duiven Municipality in the Netherlands. Now, I should probably also mention that the party to which Mr. Lukkassen belongs to is the party that also gives the Prime Minister of the country. Anyway, Mr. Lukkassen is also the author of a book on the future of Europe and identity that is yet to be translated in English. The book title is Afondland en Identiteit, Occident and Identity, or the West and Identity. So, without further ado, Mr. Lukkassen, welcome to the Freedom Alternative Interviews.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me, Lucian.
Glad to have you here. So, in order to cover as much as possible in this hour, let's get straight to business. Tell us a thing or two about yourself. How do you lean politically? How far or how close you are as a worldview when compared to mainstream Dutch politics? You know, things of that nature.
Okay, well, I studied history and philosophy. I used to be a history teacher in the Netherlands. Then I went to university. Now I'm currently doing a PhD on democracy and media. In the past 2 years, I've been busy giving all sorts of lectures about my book. I've been a city here in Duiven, as you said, in the municipalities from the VVD. And next to that, I've also worked in the European Parliament and the Tweede Kamer. Mm-hmm. Which is the Dutch National Parliament, where I've done some researches.
Mm-hmm. So, how far or how close would you consider yourself compared to mainstream Dutch politics? Are you further to the right than mainstream politics, or quite close to the mainstream of the Netherlands today?
Well, as a politician, I would say I'm pretty much a center-right, what we would call classical liberalism. In the Netherlands, so it would be sort of the right flank of the VVD. However, then I've developed much broader theories. So I've also developed more philosophy about looking at the cultural aspects of politics, looking at the moral aspects of it, and basically the effects of postmodernism, upon political philosophy, and many issues that you're also working on, such as gender, what's role patterns, traditional value. So I would say that my philosophy is broader than what I can do as a politician at the moment.
I understand. Now, the reason why I'm asking about the distance between yourself and mainstream Dutch politics is because you are from a mainstream political party, the party that gives the Prime Minister of the country, whereas the populist leader that is now probably the most well-known Dutchman in international politics, Mr. Geert Wilders, his party, PVV, split from yours. So, you know, what differentiates you and your political party from PVV's platform? And I'm asking this because, as we'll see in the next several minutes, you tend to be a little bit more identitarian-oriented, and this worldview, at least in theory, tends to find a home more in Geert Wilders' corner. So, you know, please explain to the audience these differences.
Okay, sure, I will. To begin with, what I've essentially proven in the book. Yeah, I'll show the book so you can all see it close by. This is the book that we're speaking about. It's about European identity. What I've argued in this book is that items that have belonged to alternative right, what we would say maybe the PVV, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, purely from the flow of events that's happening now in Europe, eventually the mainstream parties will be forced to take position on items that used to belong exclusively to the alternative right. That's what we see now. For instance, we used to have an alternative right person in the Netherlands a long time ago called Hans Janmaat, and he was critical of the multicultural society. And eventually, all sorts of radicals, they went to throw fire bombs at the hotel where he was staying. And it was completely radical. Everything became totally radicalized with Hans Janmaat. But then, if we look back now, 20 years later, about the things that Janmaat had said, we would say, well, yeah, even the Labour Party is saying these things nowadays. You know, the critical comments that he made back then were totally outrageous. He was fined. People wanted to disband his party. And now we have Geert Wilders, who is saying things that are like 3 or 4 times as stern and as harsh as the things that Janmaat said at the time. But also in the VVD, we have also had Frits Bolkestein. He considered himself a humanist at the time, and he was very critical about the Islam as well. For instance, the Salman Rushdie affair. So Salman Rushdie, a fatwa was announced against him, and he had to hide in cover. Well, Frits Bolkestein was also an outspoken politician of the VVD, who spoke a lot about that in the media at the time. For my personal history, for me as a politician, I was already a member from the VVD during the split up. So I was very much involved here in Duiven, just as a local follower. I was not yet a politician at the time. I was still very young. I was about 16 or 17 years old. And then Geert Wilders, he split off from the VVD, but he was already a member in the Tweede Kamer at that moment. And when this happened, I was already in the VVD, and I was doing things more locally. So I had no real reason to say I support Geert Wilders or I disagree with Geert Wilders, because yeah, he was in the Tweede Kamer, I was doing things locally. So it was so far away from me that I did not feel that I had to do anything with that at the moment.
I see. But has the split been felt on the local levels as well in municipalities, or has only been felt at the national and international stage?
Well, you have to know that the Geert Wilders PVV only participates in 2 municipalities in the Netherlands. So it's in Almere and in The Hague. So there's only 2 municipalities that have a PVV in there. However, we have of course many local political groups that are affiliated with Geert Wilders, even though they're not officially PVV. And what's also important is to note Pim Fortuyn was also a very important figure in Dutch history. He was a gay politician, and he spoke also about the Islam and about gay rights and so on. And he became very, very big in the Netherlands. Then he was assassinated by a left-wing extremist. So yeah, so things have already been moving in the Netherlands to become politically active, and people are becoming aware, and this is only increasing now. You know, what happened in Cologne in the beginning of these years, what's happening now with the mass migration, you know, the demography of Europe, how we're all getting old, and just the population of Nigeria will be 440 million, according to prognosis in 2050. Okay, there will be more people than the United States. Just one single country in Africa with all of its problems and instabilities. Well, all these people want a future, it's unstable there, and the chances are very big that people will come to Europe. We already see that people are coming to Europe now. So this causes people to wake up, you know, also now with the ISIS fighters who come from the Netherlands, from Belgium, from Britain, they're going to fight for ISIS. So people are already, yeah, just the flow of events forces political parties to take position upon matters that used to be in the Hans Janmaat or in the alternative right. Yeah, that's essentially what I'm observing.
Yeah, I have to admit that I'm glad to hear this, because in several other countries of Europe, the mainstream political parties outright refuse to take position on any of such matters. And the best example that comes to my mind is Sweden, where all the so-called mainstream and right-thinking political parties simply decided to block the only political party speaking about these issues, namely the Swedish Democrats, Vrijheid, Democraterna. And you know, there is an official deal between all the rest of the parties, including the so-called right-wing moderate party, to simply block the voice of Vrijheid, Democraterna, and the only voice that actually has at least attempts to dare to speak about issues such as the ones you have mentioned. So I'm glad that the Netherlands isn't going into that direction.
Well, the thing is, though, what you're saying now rests essentially on a pretty much naive view on how power works. And that's, many people don't know much about how power works. As I demonstrate in my PhD, just what a majority thinks, or just what people think, or what they're going to vote in the ballot, from a perspective of power, it's largely irrelevant. If you want to know how power works, you have to look at Gramsci. And you see that's people have a completely naive view of how power works. They are angry about so many things going wrong, and they're going to vote PVV, and they will think, oh my, there's going to be a massive PVV victory, and then they think that they're changing the country or that they're doing something about it. But no, because okay, where is power? Power is not just the Tweede Kamer, okay? Power is also the Council of Ministers from the European Union, for instance. Power is also the Commission from the European Union. And these people are not directly elected, they are appointed by other elites. But power is also, for instance, in labor unions, or in the Netherlands, in the Vereniging Nederlandse Gemeenten, which is a very powerful organization, which is essentially a board of municipalities. So it's a lobby organization for all the municipalities in the Netherlands, and they're very powerful. And then there's, of course, lobbyists and public officials. So even though, as Max Weber has argued, that public officials has to be neutral in practice, there is an overrepresentation in political party members from public officials. And then there's judges. You see that nowadays political matters are pushed into the courtroom. We've seen this, for instance, in the United States, but it's now also coming to Europe. It's coming to countries like France and so on. Whether it's about gay marriage, or it's about, for instance, a process for hate speech or something against politicians. So there are so many channels where power is happening.
Yeah, we're going to talk about
laws.
We are going to talk about the hate speech laws a bit later in the interview, because I have a case in mind from the Netherlands that I want to ask you about it. But until then, let's talk about your work in general, because although I have not read your book because I don't speak Dutch, not yet, I guess, because probably sooner or later I'm going to have to learn Dutch as well. Just like I learned another 10 or 12 languages. Anyway, but you have written in English as well in numerous places, including papers for the European Parliament. So, tell us more about that. How do you think, for instance, how did the Brussels officials, whether it's members of the European Parliament or members of the Commission or members of the staff, how did they react to your work? And what about, essentially explain us more about your work on the European stage.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk about that. I have many friends in the European Parliament, and in other branches as well, for instance, in the Commission. And I will just show you, because I have some books here. This is a book by Limack. It talks about redrafting Europe. So I worked on this, and here I am basically saying that the discussion should not be about having more Europe or having less Europe. It should be about where should a certain power be. So should this responsibility be at a European level or at a national level? So we need to have a clear discussion about where we want to organize these competencies. It's about subsidiarity. So, for instance, should something be about media? Okay, should it be handled at national level or should it be handled at European level? Education, the military, immigration, etc. So instead of having a pro-Europe Europhilia or anti-Europe Euroscepsis, well, we have to talk much more about how do we want to distribute this power. I mean, we need a clear delineated set of powers and where this power is, because now we have a hodgepodge of powers everywhere and it's totally intransparent. So yeah, that is basically my position that I argued in this redrafting Europe. Then this is also another one. It's more recent. It's about regional disparities. It's also by Limack. We've been to a conference about that in Poland, and there I argue about innovation policy and industry policy. This is also what I worked on as a researcher for the ALDE group. I worked in the ITRE committee. So, so briefly, for instance, if you look at Chinese steel production, the United States has, since the 90s, directives against the dumping of Chinese steel in the USA. So they're defending their own jobs, their own industry, their own technology, etc. Whereas for Europe, there are so many different little nations in here that China, if they want to dump steel, they will just work through all their smaller countries, their own vassal states. And then Europe needs to have like 10 or 20 different directions for each country. We are not handling these things. If purely from an industrial level, European law, that's what I've argued here, is still in the state age framework. So our laws on competition and our laws against government interference in technology and industry, they are to to make sure that there's a fair competition between countries. For instance, it's based on competition between France and Germany, or between, for instance, Poland and the UK or whatnot. So our laws in Europe, they are based on our economy, or mutual competition, whereas the United States is much more streamlined on a geopolitical level. So they moved essentially past the stage age framework, and they're now capable of, yeah, stronger and faster responses to it.
Yeah, well,
we're still looking inside ourselves as Europe. We're staring at our neighbors, and meanwhile, China, India, it's all taking over the world right now. And we as Europeans, we are creative people. We are innovators. We created so much technology in the past. We created so much ingenious innovation, and now you just see how other people, they take this and they run with it, and we're too slow to respond to it. That's what I've argued in the second publication.
I see. As far as I'm concerned, I'm probably disagreeing with you on most of these things. I take a more Milton Friedman approach. If China wants to force its taxpayers to subsidize cheap steel for we to buy, who am I to say no? Let them subsidize it. It's at the end of the day, it is to their own detriment, which is already happening with the collapsing housing bubble and whatnot that is happening right now in China. So, on the long run, it is still to their own detriment and not to the detriment of us. Now, as with the competition law in the European Union, I just happen to know quite a lot about that. And I think it's fundamentally retarded, no matter how you put it. For instance, the European Commission was still fining Microsoft in 2012 for their supposed monopoly on Windows Media Player, whereas the market had already decided that the Windows Media Player is retarded. And in 2012, Microsoft was already voluntarily retracting the product from the market because other products such as VLC or BS Media Player had taken over that particular branch of IT services. So the competition law in the European Union tends to be not just archaic, but completely useless. I mean, they're fighting Microsoft for a monopoly on Internet Explorer. This also happened, and I'm sure you know it. Again, fighting Microsoft for that, even though the market had already fixed that problem and brought in more competition with the advent of, I don't know, let's say the Mozilla Foundation or some other initially smaller but now significantly bigger players than Internet Explorer could have ever become. And now, Internet Explorer has been voluntarily destroyed by Microsoft with their latest product. So, in many areas, the competition law and the competition, this process of ensuring fair competition hasn't exactly succeeded, but rather failed and made the market worse, not better.
Yeah, well, there's two things to say about this. And the first thing is that the United States and China, they have a very different strategic position than Europe does. Purely because of their military advantage and their hard power, the United States will always be able to secure that they have a steady inflow of resources. Not only do they have many resources themselves, but also they have military hard power, and their economy is so entangled with the other economies. For instance, in banana republics, the currencies are totally worthless. So people there pay with United States dollars. So the United States can just print more dollars. They have complete economic control over many countries in the world. And if they want to, they can always force them with their military power. And China, it's pretty much the same thing. They are going to South America, they're going to Africa. They buy off anyone who could oppose them in terms of human rights. They make deals with dictators. They bring their own companies there, grab all the resources, they put it in a safe somewhere in China, and it's theirs. And if Europe would do that, it would of course be considered as colonialism. So the economic space that Europe has left open, it's now being taken over by China. And the thing is, though, that we do not have the hard power to guarantee access to these resources. And there we need, for instance, innovation, so that we can create new resources from particles. That's where you would need technology to come in. And another very important aspect is the growth of the population. We see that the growth of the population in the world is still expanding. That means that people are going to have more consumption products. And when they are going to need more consumption product, they're going to need more natural resources. So although the price of natural resources is still dropping, it's going to increase in the coming years. And to prepare for that, we need more innovation because we do not have the hard military capacity to earn these resources directly. And what's other important is the competition point that you made. For instance, nowadays you have these massive phone companies and massive entertainment companies, and they make audio systems and they sue each other. So they launch a court case against another company, a massive phone company does it, and the other one launches another legal campaign. So they're all using legal systems, in essence, to fight each other and to deter the innovation of the other.
Yes,
and because of all these legal wars, it becomes more difficult for new companies and new innovators and new AD to step in. And it, in essence, destroys the competition and it destroys the innovation that we need as Europeans.
Well, that's essentially the case being made for throwing out the idea of EU or state-dictated competition laws. That's what I was saying. The competition law system, the so-called antitrust, it may have been well-intended, but it turned out to be significantly worse for the competition itself. It's essentially destroying what it's supposed to protect, which is precisely what's happening with other systems, such as the welfare state, which essentially ends up perpetuating poverty instead of...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But there's also an important difference between VVD and PVV, for instance. So whereas the VVD has traditionally campaigned for a smaller state and smaller welfare state, the PVV is more supportive of the welfare state. So that's also an important difference in nuance between VVD and PVV. Since you asked me earlier to give an example of that, well, that is a very good example of the welfare state. And yes, it's true, because in the Netherlands, people have become so dependent upon the welfare state that a major part of the GDP is nowadays part of the government. Right? So you're saying in Romania, people are more suspicious towards the government, and they would like to control their government. They are suspicious about bureaucrats. But in the Netherlands, everyone has either a bureaucrat as family relative or as a neighbor, and probably both. So that's why we as the Netherlands, we are more trusty towards the welfare state, and we're more trusty towards the government than in Eastern Europe. That's a very important cultural point.
I see. Now, you already entered a little bit into the details of your book, but what is the central premise of your book? Are we all going to hell in a handbasket? What is exactly the fundamental case that you're trying to make in your book? And I'm asking this question not just, since the book isn't available in English yet, I presume that soon it will be available. So, prepare...
We want to make it available.
Yeah, prepare the audience for what they should expect once it becomes available in English.
Yeah, I want to make it available in English, but to translate it to English would cost about 10,000 euro. And the publisher asked me to find this money somewhere. So, so either I need some volunteer who will translate this for me, or I will need random donations. But then I will have to get an accountant, and I would have to, what if I don't gather enough money? Would I have to send it back? How would I do with taxes? And they will make it so complicated. So I just haven't had the time to do it. But I really think that this book should be available also in Europe and in America and other parts of the world. So yeah, I would really love to translate it. I will just quote from the book directly two main hypotheses. It's as follows. My working hypotheses are this. 1. The fact that increasingly amount of Western men try to find their future with women from traditional cultures can be explained from the influence of cultural Marxism on man-woman relationship within Western culture on the long term. 2. The fact that the European culture is so sensitive for culture Marxism, for the obsession with minorities, victims, and feelings of guilt, can be explained from Christianity.
I've heard this argument before. It was, I think, the first time I heard it also was from a Dutchman. It wasn't from you, but also from from a Dutch-speaking man. I don't remember his name. Actually, I do.
Oh, okay.
I would rather keep. He's not a public figure, so I'd rather keep his discretion. Please explain more to that connection with Christianity, because it's the same connection that has been made in the previous Freedom Alternative interviews by Professor Janice Fiamengo. So please explain more.
Yeah, well, that's why I love Romania, basically, because you guys are in the perfect position to understand what I mean with this book. Because, of course, you've been under the heel of the Marxists for several decades. So you know what it is to be ruled by hardcore Marxists. But also the power of the church. So after the Ceausescu's and so on, when the communists fell, there was a vacuum of power that's been filled in by the church. And we see this in many Eastern European countries. Yeah, but these churches, of course, what they are doing is using the taxpayer money to build more churches and so on. So now you have the perfect vacuum where you have, on the one hand, you have a post-Marxist phase where you're critical towards Marxism, but on the other hand, you have also a phase where you're also critical towards the power of the clerics and the power of the church. And that creates a perfect vacuum for a humanist philosophy that I've created in my book. And that's why I'm also very happy to speak about it with you. Well, you know, the thing about Christianity is it goes very far back. It's much about turning the other cheek and going the second mile and self-reflection. It's about humility, in a sense. And what's happened now is that with all the traumas of the Second World War, so we had the massacres of Verdun, we have had the colonial troubles, you know, we had the fighting for freedom, all the racism with the KKK and the apartheid and the Holocaust and the atom bomb. So all these things, or pride, or technology, or national feelings, or innovation, all these things had, in a sense, they had turned against the Western mind. And that causes this humility that's, for instance, Gandhi, he discovered that the British colonists would not fight the unarmed people. They would not shoot unarmed people. So they found out that there's something, this chivalry ethic in us, it was turned completely upside down. So of course we want to protect women, that's what we want to do as Europeans, but at the same time we had this feminism. So this was this vulnerability to protecting the vulnerable, which was exploded into a perversion of it, where nowadays, you know, people nowadays, this culture Marxism has gone so far that people today think they have to be neo-Nazi bullshit in order to be proud of their nation. It's completely introvert now. So that's what I'm arguing in the book. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that cultural Marxism was able to grow because, and not in spite, but because of the vulnerabilities that have been lingering throughout the European culture, vulnerabilities essentially stemming from Christianity, you know, the idea of turning the other cheek, be as polite as possible, protect women at all costs, and all that, you know, all this traditional mindset essentially created the vulnerability in the culture for cultural Marxism. That's what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And, you know, people have these traditional ideas, you know, your mommy, your daddy, they ask each other for the prom, and after the prom, they have their first kiss, and they married, and they had a family for as long as we know. What's happily ever after. And people nowadays still think that they have these traditional ideas and that they can date women with this, and they bring flowers or chocolates to their first date, you know, and these women think that they're going to be needy, and, you know, they feel connected, they want to be free, and they don't want to be burdened down and whatnot. So all these ideas that have been pumped in from traditional values, today it's totally out of the window. We live in a completely consumerist state where our identity is defined by the products that we consume, and this identity is very fickle. This identity is very unstable, and people do not longer have the intellectual or moral philosophical background. You know, they don't have an anchor in that sense. And what we see now is that other militant forms have come in to fill this vacuum. So we have a sort of philosophical vacuum in our identity, and people don't really know, you know, they don't know about the values or the boundaries. So now we see militant Islam. It's marching on in many places in Western Europe. You have now the militant Islam that's telling people how to live and how to dress and how to behave, and it's very clear and well defined for them, and it sort of gives them a support. But is that the support that we as Europeans would want to have in our culture? That's something different.
Probably not. So, you know, a few minutes ago you said that you know, there is a need, and in some places in Europe, you mentioned Romania, but it's not only Romania. There is this what you called perfect vacuum for a more humanistic philosophy. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about that, but you definitely do make the case that Europe, or the Occident, as you sometimes call it, is losing its identity, and that's definitely true in Western Europe Not so much here, although it's starting to happen here as well. But how would you respond to the Euro fanatics who say that the European Union can be, or indeed is, for the most extreme Euro fanatics, such as Mr. Juncker, the European Union can be capable of providing some sort of a unifying humanistic Occidental identity? And I'm not asking this to annoy you, but because I have been served this argument in the past, and I'm curious how you see it, given what you have already said in this interview so far.
Well, I'm not annoyed by this question at all, because it's a very good question, and it's also very simply refuted. Because Euro fanatics have never argued to defend the European from an identity perspective, or to defend Europe from a cultural perspective. Because if Euro fanatics would try to defend Europe from a cultural perspective, then it would run into tricky questions. For instance, we've had some traces of the Ottoman Empire in the Eastern Europe. They've left the Islam there. So is the Islam part of Europe, or is the Islam not part of European culture? So what about Turkey then? Should Turkey be allowed as an Islamic country? Well, 20 years ago it was a secular country. Now it's an Islamist country. Yeah. So it runs into identity issues that the extreme Euro fanatics don't want even to think about. So instead, they will argue it from a purely economical perspective. And in that sense, extreme Euro fanatics are Marxists, because they think that by creating a single market, they will create an economic substructure. So it goes back to Marxism, the superstructure and the understructure, and the basis bovenbouw. So they are thinking that by just making an entangled European Union that's economically entangled, they create like a perfect rectangular flat sphere that's also the basis for a culture to evolve from. So in that sense, they're almost Marxism, because they think that purely from an economic point of view, they can create a sort of intellectual or moral fusion of cultures. So again, Euro fanatics will never try to argue for Europe from a cultural point of view. Never. That's not how they think.
Okay.
They're utopians. They could be now in Copenhagen, and then tomorrow they're in London, and the day afterwards they're in Lisbon. They have a completely flexible, on-the-move lifestyle. They're cosmopolitans. They basically see the world as a tourist would see the world. They don't really have an anchor or local connections anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do agree with that part. Although the bit about about the economies of various European nations being entangled, that already can happen, and indeed does happen naturally. I mean, it doesn't need a European bureaucracy, but then again, you won't see Euro fanatics arguing themselves out of a job. But you did say that the Euro fanatics don't argue from an identity perspective, and I would like to slightly disagree, because I routinely follow, especially the positions coming out from the European Parliament group called the Nordic Union of Left Wing, or something like that, NUL. And they actually do argue from an identity perspective. They think all of us should be a bunch of cultural Marxists with parent one and parent two, because mother and father is sexist, heteronormative, and offensive. So they do argue from an identity perspective. It's just that they want to impose an identity that is, I would dare to say, completely incompatible with what I would call European values.
Yeah. Well, that would lead back to this thing that I touched on before about the axis. So this is philosophical. I'm going to explain it. So philosophy as it is today, political philosophy, because I am a political philosopher, so that's what I always argue, is based on the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment, what did it create? It created two branches, basically. It created, on the one hand, the Marxist branch, socialist branch, what used to be utopic socialists such as Rousseau, and then eventually became Marxist. They're always arguing from a collective point. So they will say that the government needs to have a strong hand in the economy, and they will say that the community has a very important role. And then on the other hand, there's more the individual approach, such as, for instance, John Stuart Mill or Adam Smith, and those. They will argue much more that the individual should be free to develop knowledge, to have individual initiative, and that responsibility should also be from the bottom. And this is the traditional axis. So you have liberals on the one hand, And then I mean economic liberals, they argue for economic freedoms. And then on the other hand, there's the hardcore Marxists and the softs and the social democrats and whatnot, the collectivists. But this is a post thingy, yeah. It's past now. There's gonna come a new axis, and we see already Geert Wilders, Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen. They are bringing this now. So now it's much more about this is about identity and sovereignty. It's no longer about economic power and to give this economic power to either the state or to the individual. It's nowadays about this identity. Should it be defined from a national point of view or a local point of view? So these are the people who are left in decrepit old city neighborhoods with many cheap rental houses, and they feel left by their politicians. They've been abandoned by their politicians. Or the countryside, because Brussels, New York, and London, and The Hague, they speak to each other, yeah, but they don't speak to the province around it. They don't speak to the countryside. And these people, they want the sovereignty back in a local thingy where they can control it. And these are represented by the Donald Trumps and the Marine Le Pens of this world.
Yeah, but you know
that's a new axis. That's how we, and the culture Marxists of the North, or something what you call them, they see themselves as world citizens, and they see themselves as socially engineered utopians who don't need any local roots. They are cosmopolitans, and they represent the other side of the axis. They want sovereignty from a almost universal perspective.
Yeah, the countryside is not diverse enough, it's not progressive enough. So of course it's being abandoned by the mainstream politicians. Now, since we're still on the topic of identity, which I'm not surprised at all, since most of Europe is basically now post-Christian in its identity, now we can argue whether that's a good thing or what, or a bad thing. What is the appropriate answer to this absolute fact right now? Should those of us of non-insane, non-collectivist persuasion strive for a comeback of some of those traditional values, or even of Christianity as a whole? Because I don't think that's possible or likely. How do you view these things? What is an appropriate answer?
It starts by people such as you and me who spread this knowledge and then make people think about it and have a debate about this. Because what the mainstream would want you to think is that only like fanatics or radicals or whatever talk about this. No, but just by you and me having this discussion, that it's possible to have a high-level academic exchange of thought on these matters. And they want to monopolize the mind, in a sense. They want to monopolize the mind for the utopians and so on. Ayn Rand and others have argued this before. I don't need to go into it. But I want to go back to what you said about the sovereignty, and that we want to be controlling matters in our own hands and not be ruled by some collectivist government. That's what you said, I think. That you want to have a control of the sovereignty, or want to have at least a control of your own life and have your own individual liberties. That you want to defend your own individual liberties. And this is very deeply into the European DNA. In the Netherlands, we had the blijde inkomsten, but we also had the Plakkaat van Verlatingen. So the United States Declaration of Independence is based on the Plakkaat van Verlatingen, where the Netherlands said, we want to have religious freedom, and we don't want to have the Spanish king anymore, and we don't want the Inquisition here, and so on. So we're going to succeed from the Spanish monarchy. We've had in Britain the Bill of Rights, when William III. Yeah, exactly. And then afterward, the Magna Carta was before. The Bill of Rights. So the Glorious Revolution and so on. So this is very deeply in our European DNA, that we want to control things from the grassroots. We don't want to have an absolute monarchy as King Louis XIV had it in France, but we want to organize from a lower platform and build up. And then the China and the Islam think the opposite way. They want to organize things from a central, they want to locate power from a single entity and center everything around that. And that's also how the communists think. So if we become enmeshed in a sort of globalist culture, here, I'll show you. This guy argued that. This guy, Francis Fukuyama, his idea was that mankind will accept liberalism inevitably, and that capitalism will continue, and that in the slow march of the peoples will be all become liberal consumers, in a sense. But that's not happening. We see now in the United States Council, we see now that the Sharia law, the Organisation Coopération Islamique, they are arguing to implement Sharia law across the world. They want to ban all sorts of things that they find religiously offensive. They will call it defamation of religion. And now the Human Rights Council is from Saudi Arabia, where the poets, they just get whiplashes, they hang people, they stone people. And now, if you would go to these cultural Marxists of the Northern Union of Cultural Marxists, or whatever you call them, and say, what do you want? Do you now want a world culture where we all become world citizens? But then you have to pay the price, okay? The price of sexual freedom for women, the freedom for art, freedom for art expression. What do you want now? No, because they will never accept this. Even China says that human rights are an imperialist construction of the Western world to spread its own views of humans across the world, and so on. And they will reject this. And we saw this in Iran with the gay laws, and Russia also thinks differently about things. So we are not evolving towards some world culture where all human rights are shared equally or interpreted equally. No, we are not evolving towards that. So in a sense,
what you're saying is that the planet is still diverse, regardless of what the cultural Marxists would like to think.
Yeah, and that makes, in a sense, identitarianism mainstream, in that sense that being a classical liberal would make you also an identitarian, because you're going to make the choice, what do I want? Do I want these liberties that we're used to? So do we want our children to grow up in the same personal liberties that we have enjoyed? Okay, but maybe we have to gonna step up to the plate and say, this is Europe, this is where we have these traditional liberties. They are rooted in the Magna Carta, in the Plakkaat van Verlating, in the Bill of Rights, and so on. And this is the traditions of freedom and liberties that we will defend in our sovereign states. These are the liberties that we will defend upon our territory. So that makes, in a sense, liberalism even identitarian, because then you cannot have at the same time that you're going to accept blasphemy laws that are pushed in the United Nations. Because if you accept these blasphemy laws, you're making amendments to your own cultural values that are at the core of who you are as a European citizen.
Yes,
that's my point.
Yeah, true. What I would like to also bring is just a small little fact that very few people know, is that whenever I speak about these issues, or in similar format as yours or whatnot, I'm always struck by this argument. Yeah, but if we don't cooperate each other through a bureaucracy such as the European Commission, then we will go to war with each other. And I'm like, well, no. For instance, our countries, Romania and the Netherlands, have been having a free trade agreement since the 1920s. And the only ones who dared to touch it and suspend it, essentially, for several decades were the peace-loving commies. I mean, for as long as, regardless of what governments were in power in the Netherlands or in Romania, whether including fascist governments, they didn't dare to touch it. But the second the peace-loving globalist commies came to power, that's when the free trade agreement stopped. So the same thing happened with other countries such as Italy and France. Italy and France don't really like each other, but they had free trade agreements as early as 1910, 1915. So we can trade together whilst still being individual nation states that respect our cultural differences. We don't need, if Sweden wants to go to a full-blown cultural Marxist way, well, it's Sweden's business, but we don't have to listen to that same thing and import it here, because, I find it horrifying that now the Swedish idea of not having birth certificates that write mother and father because that's offensive now has become quite mainstream in France, in Italy, countries that really don't have anything in common with the Swedish way of viewing things through Jantelagen.
Yeah, well, I agree and I disagree, because, of course, communists don't like free trade. Whoa, big surprise here. Next point. Let's say Sweden becomes a sort of caliphate or whatever. You see that they are out reproducing themselves, and just there's laws now where you cannot even criticize the multicultural society, or they will sue you for it and put you in jail and whatnot. Well, if this falls, then Europe is like a fruit. So if a small spot starts to rot, then ultimately the rot spreads to the rest of it. We see that very clearly in Molenbeek. So Molenbeek, you have to know, it's only 10 minutes walk from the European Parliament, okay?
I know.
Same thing in the Netherlands, Schilderswijk, okay? It's only 5 minutes walk from the Tweede Kamer, yeah? So, and this is where the Sharia fanatics, they are now hoarding up and they're amassing. And the Molenbeek attack, well, this ultimately got to Paris. So that's where they prepared the Paris attack. And the refugees who come in for Greece, well, it was even proven that there were refugees involved who were registered as refugees in Greece, who were part of the attack in Paris and things like that. So if one part of Europe falls, then the rest will fall as well. And therefore, I think I do believe that Europe needs a sort of unity. We all think that we have these empires, the British Empire, or the French kingdom, or the Dutch Empire. We have the colonial empire, and we think that we're still ruling the world in a sense, you know, and that nothing will ever happen. And I think Cameron, he also thinks that way, you know, oh, we're just going to be in the Anglosphere, and we're gonna, we're gonna be with Canada and the United States, and we don't need Europe and so on. That's idiotic. Okay, that's no longer the case now. We really have to fight for the little bit of power that we have and to preserve it. So it's not as if it's not as if there's a large load of sovereignty and that this sovereignty is disappearing. No, we have a tiny, teeny bit of sovereignty, and by pooling the sovereignty, we may be able to preserve it in a turbulent, globalizing world.
Yeah, well, the thing is that that kind of solidarity you're speaking about can exist without what I perceive a Marxist central bureaucracy. No, look, I'm a hardcore Eurosceptic. I think the European Union should be completely dismantled because it's been a cancer upon Europe. But nevertheless, that kind of solidarity you're talking about, and I agree with your point on that, can exist without a unifying bureaucracy. Case in point, the Soviet Republic of Hungary, that's an entity that existed for like 3 months. The Bela Kun government, Bela Kun, by the way, was a member of the Frankfurt School, and then further on ended up being a contributor to the cultural Marx.
Let no one say that this is a conspiracy theory. Yeah, Frederick Jameson, a well-known culture critic from the United States, calls himself a culture Marxist. Okay. So let no one ever say that this is not academic or that this is a conspiracy theory. This is proven by the facts.
Yeah, absolutely. No, what I was trying to give you an example was that when Hungary had a cultural Marxist government installed more or less by force, led with Bela Kun and other cultural Marxists that were quite honest about their philosophy, they weren't trying to hide anything. The dissidents and the freedom lovers from Hungary came to Romania, and we in Hungary don't really quite get along with each other. They came to Romania and said, look, you need to help us because we're having fucking Bolsheviks in power and they're killing our society, quite literally, both culturally and literally. And the Romanian army invaded Hungary in 1919, took down the Bolshevik government, reinstated a more natural government that has more connection with the actual reality in the field, and then left. Yeah. This kind of solidarity can exist, and that kind of thing happened without any unifying bureaucracy and with countries that don't like each other again. So I think that kind of solidarity.
But now let's make this concrete. Let's take the case of France now, because in France you have a very big, powerful Front National, and the Front National is also supported by the police, and it's also supported by the army, because people are like, hey, I'm here to protect people's freedoms, but there's so many criminals now, and we only see that more criminals are coming, so we have to take a political position. So in that sense, the military and the police, they are becoming politically aware in France. But let's say there's a coup d'etat, because we know that France is a nation that has a history of coups.
Even the word coup d'etat is French.
Exactly, yes. And they have had several changes of the government, and they have had several changes of the constitution, and then they became a monarchy, and then a presidency, and so on, and it goes all the way back to Napoleon and before that. So, yeah. So what will we do? For instance, the Germans, would they have to intervene to prevent a coup d'etat of the right nationalists in France, or the United States? Because then they will think, oh, but the Front National is allied with Putin, is allied with Russia. So what's going to happen now? We lose our grip upon Europe if this happens. Should we allow this? And before we know it, we'll have civil war in Europe, because it spreads to Greece, where you have the debt crisis now, which millions of people are unemployed. And it can spread to other parts of Sweden, and where there's tensions. These tensions are growing so fast and so deep. There's already we already see the examples of it. The Brexit or the MH17, so the plane that was shut down in Ukraine. It's still not cleared up what happened exactly. So there's so many things going wrong in Europe at the moment. We may need some sort of a central power to prevent us from completely disintegrating, because I fear that if it collapses, we will have the Islam fighting their wars here. ISIS has declared that they will batter down the gates of Rome within 20 years. Well, we're going to have a smoking heap left, and we're going to beg the Chinese to come here and take us under their wing, because we are so hollowed out by all
I don't see, and I know I'm prolonging this interview. I want it to be 1 hour. It's probably going to exceed a little bit. But I don't see how the European Commission can prevent a rise in power to parties like Front National. I don't see how they can do it.
You can't, because they're not in tune with the people. They're not in touch with the facts on the ground. I was in the Berlaymont, okay? I'm going to make this concrete now, okay? And they built 2 years ago a garage, and I was there seeing it built. And the Berlaymont is the building of the commission in the Brussels. So it means that all the public officials working there, they can park their car in this protected garage, and it will be safe. Whereas the people who don't work here, they have to park their car on the streets. Vandalists can come and they can scratch the car or steal the car or whatever. And people are going to say, we have to stamp down on crime. We need a stricter government. We need law and order. Why? Because they are the victims of this crime. Whereas all the Eurocrats who have their cars in the big garage paid for by the taxpayer, they don't have any problems. And they're going to say, you know what? It's not so bad. You should be more tolerant. You see the good sides in people. The future is bright. It comes down to a fundamental difference in character, because they have completely separate lives and separate values in their lives. And that's why the European Commission is not able to contain this.
Yes, and well, to be fair, this tends to happen with all politicians, regardless of whether it's a more democratic, whatever, free system or a more authoritarian system. With time, politicians tend to become...
But the thing is, though, Lucian, we used to be a free democracy, but nowadays we're also evolving into authoritarian systems, because now there's politicians in the Netherlands who have criticized the refugee centers, and the police comes to their door and says, hey, you should not tweet about that. And the mayor nowadays orders the police to come to Twitter users and to politicians and whatnot in the Netherlands and go, ding dong, you are not supposed to tweet about that, because things can escalate, and we never know who's to blame when things escalate. So it's pure intimidation. It's happening in the Netherlands, and we are a very liberal country, but even here, this
similar thing, in fact, worse has happened in Germany, where police has raided people's homes and arrested everyone they found there, also for politically incorrect comments on Facebook about progress, diversity, and all these kinds of topics. Now, since you moved to Dutch politics, which is exactly the direction that I wanted to go, I reported recently on my channel, citing a story from, I think it was NRC Handelsblad, but I could be wrong, where the police has started indeed visiting people, not just politicians, but random people, and telling, hey, wait a minute, you tweet too much about refugees, you should stop, or otherwise you could be charged with seditious activity. Now, you said that you're more involved in local politics than national politics. Has that happened in your area as well? And how do local politicians in general, I presume you speak with other local politicians as well, how do local politicians tend to view these things?
Well, I'm a city councilor in Duiven, and these things happened in Friesland, in Enschede, in Sliedrecht, and so on. So they happen in other municipalities. So I speak to local municipality people, but not to these specifically. But well, this is a taboo, basically. So of course there's websites like Geen Stijl that talk about it, But yeah, people, they tend to think of these websites as sort of an undercurrent. No, it's not really part of the mainstream debate yet. And I would like to this German example of the police battering down the door. This happened in the Netherlands. It's a guy called Gregorius Nekschot who made a cartoon about Mohammed, and then the police came with a bunch of military enforcers, and they arrested him and whatnot. And he was just a cartoonist. Things like that happened here in the Netherlands as well. I wrote an article for Splijtstof magazine, which is a philosophical magazine for the Nijmegen University. And I wrote in it, and I'm saying that now this is very dangerous because we see that Merkel and Mark Zuckerberg, they want to control hate speech in Facebook. But the discussion, where does a political critique of multiculturalism edge over and becomes racism? That is itself a political point. That should be decided through a political discussion. What is the boundaries between racism and a genuine critique of multicultural? But nowadays, this is moved to companies such as Facebook, and they fall under private patents, they fall under private company laws, and they make their own rules about this. It's their company secrets, it's their algorithms. They use the algorithms to make progressive messages more visible, and the critical or the conservative messages to put them at the bottom of the list. And we as consumers do not have access to this. So the Merkel politicians, what they are doing is they are making a political discussion towards a private company to
they put a private
it.
company to do the dirty work for them, because you cannot sue a private company for breaching the First Amendment, for instance, because it's their company.
And then we cannot be citoyens anymore. Huh? It undermines our political discourse as a society. And we become from the citoyen to the consumer. And this article was not allowed to be posted. So first they said, "Oh, Mr. Lukkassen, this is such a good article. You should expand upon it." But when push came to shove, they did not want to publish it in the Splijtstof magazine. So I published it instead.
Too controversial.
Yeah, and I also argued that that's essentially a class politics. This is class politics, because if you are higher into the humanities, you've learned how to argue, and you control the subtleties of a debate, and you're able to make an erudite point about multiculturalism. But if you're alone and you've not been in school, then you're like, oh, but if I write something critical about multiculturalism, it might be flagged as racism because maybe it's not nuanced enough what I say, so I better shut up about it. So indirectly, this is also a class mechanism, because it favors the people who have learned through being trained for this in how to make a point in a very nuanced style, whereas very direct people who've not learned that, they will be flagged as racists, or they are afraid to be flagged as racist, and they will shut up about it.
Yeah, and it creates the mechanism of self-censorship, which has been in place for many years under communism here, which is why I argue always for absolute freedom of speech. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if the Nazis want to have a march in the street, just like the commies have, and by the way, the commie one is legal, I think the Nazis should have their points get across in the streets if they want. And the solution to so-called hate speech is more speech and not repression, because the more you reprimand something by legal means, the more you create martyrdom, and the more you create people willing to listen to that. Because, well, if the state is censoring this kind of speech, then maybe there's something onto it. That's how usually the human mind tends to work. In here, for instance, we used to listen a lot to Radio Free Europe, even though we didn't like half of its program. But we used to listen it because it was forbidden to do so. Once it was no longer illegal to listen to Radio Free Europe, the audience of Radio Free Europe pretty much plunged.
That is the difference between George Orwell 1984 and Aldous Huxley Brave New World. You're not destroying a people by banning books. No, you're drowning them with consumerism so that there's no one left who even wants to read books.
Yes.
That's how you destroy a civilization.
Yes, and you also made the point that we as the consumers don't have a way of recourse or a choice. I would disagree on that. And here's why. Twitter. Twitter has been going on towards a more progressive worldview, where anything that's not progressive is, more or less subjected to all sorts of chicanery or even outright banning from the platform. Conversely, the stock of Twitter has continued to plummet. Every time they limit free speech, their stock prices go even lower. So I would say that we do have a recourse. We can vote with our wallets. If we own stocks at Twitter, we should sell them at the below market prices and punish them financially for that. If we don't, we could stop using some platform and use others. So there is recourse. It's just that it's a more subtle recourse. And yes, by free market means it takes a lot longer to deliver justice.
Well, finally, I would only say two things about this. First of all, it's only a small minority of people like you and me who are really actively thinking about it, and it's not us who decide the value of the stock price. Okay. Second thing is that the markets did not care about Charlie Hebdo. Okay, the stock market did not care about the Paris attack. If even nowadays, old people, pensioners in their house, they're being robbed, raped, assaulted. The stock markets don't care about such bad barbarism, okay? So I don't think that a stock market, what happens there, that's a bunch of cosmopolitans living in offices in Wall Street who regulate that. Okay?
No.
That does not say anything about the values that a society need to behold together.
You did misunderstand my point. What I was saying is that when it comes to private companies trying to do the government's dirty work, such as Zuckerberg deciding to submit himself to the will of Angela Merkel, or Twitter deciding to submit itself to the will of the United Nations or whatnot, when it comes to these particular cases, the stock market can be a very good tool. Now, with the case of Charlie Hebdo, well, Charlie Hebdo wasn't listed on the stock market, so we cannot know how the stock market would have reacted on that because, well, it wasn't there. That's what I was trying to say. I do completely agree with you that the stock market doesn't have to care, and indeed does not care, if some elderly people in Poland or Germany or whatnot are being robbed or raped.
No, I'm saying that the stock market is a reflection of a market dynamic, but doesn't say anything about the values that a society needs at a fundamental level to hold itself together. And just the Paris attack, that people go around shooting each other, that it had no visible effect on any price of stocks. That proves that this financial world is becoming increasingly disentangled from basically the free way of life.
You're wrong on this. The Paris attacks did have an effect on the market. The tourism in Paris has pretty much taken a nosedive because people now are afraid to go to Paris, and they would like, well, maybe I should go to Warsaw instead of Paris.
A good example is Turkey.
What?
For instance, I think that Turkey is also losing its freedom increasingly to Islamism. The tourists, I think, should not go there anymore and punish them economically.
And they don't anymore since
that's exactly. So it's up to people like you and me to make people aware and that our values that we share and that we want to propagate, and we have a political responsibility to propagate these values so that our children can live at least in a free society that still have some liberties. That we have to use our power as consumers for that. That's what I think.
We can vote with our wallet. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right.
We are only a small minority, but at least we can try to wake people up one step at a time.
One final question. A little over a year from now, in March, something if I remember correctly, there is a general election scheduled in the Netherlands. And as we've talked, given the current tensions, such as the refugee crisis, the increasing tensions about the crackdown on freedom of speech, the rising support for more populist-leaning ideas, such as Mr. Geert Wilders, what are your predictions for the next year's general elections in the Netherlands?
Well, first of all, we have to be distrustful of polls, because in 2012, the polls promised that the SP, so the hardcore GUI socialists and the PVV would win big, but in the end the VVD and the PvdA won big. So the polls don't really mean anything. So I will say the following. If the PVV does win, and I give him a great chance that the PVV will become very big in the Tweede Kamer, then there is a problem. That's what the point that I tried to make a half an hour ago was that power is not just the will of the people in terms of votes. And power is also in mayors, power is in the VNG, power is in the Eerste Kamer. So even
in the civil service, the bureaucracy, yes.
the media, etc., etc. And the PVV has no hold in there, okay? They don't have any mayors. The PVV don't have public officials. Well, they may have a few, but not nearly as much as the PvdA. So even though the PvdA, which is the laborers, the socialists, they will go down to what, 10, 12 seats, but they will still have the mayors, they will still have the public officials, the top officials, the media channels, the subsidies, they will still have all this. And the PVV does not have any of that. In fact, it's very hard to come into the PVV because Geert Wilders, he is in the security. So, you know, they're very afraid that people with bad intentions may come to close him, who try to harm him, or people who try to disrupt the party. So it's very hard even to become in the PVV. And if you are in the PVV, then you cannot be a teacher at a school, for instance, because they will try to fire you and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so,
the bureaucracy will try to shun you out. Yes.
Exactly. So the PVV may have a very big power in the parliament, but in the Senate, so the Senate is already elected now, they do not. And they will have to do, I don't know, in the Senate they're small, so what they're gonna do, because even if the Tweede Kamer agrees upon something, then the Eerste Kamer just guns it down. So that's a very big problem for them. They may have power in the political opinion, they may have power in the parliament, but they do not have power in the other institutions, such as the Raad van State, for instance, which is an obscure council with where they decide about the supreme law cases and whatnot. And things like that. So this can lead to a meltdown of institutions, and I think then in that case we may have a complete democratic meltdown.
So you're saying that PVV does have a chance to win, or at least come second, and because to the rest of the people who don't know anything about Dutch politics, the Netherlands is a country with a lot of parties, and it is rarely, if ever, the case when one party actually gets over 50% and comes to control everything. It's usually usually coalition governments. So you're saying that
always.
You're saying no, it's not always. In the 70s, there was a socialist government without coalition, but almost usually it's a coalition government. So what you're saying is that even if PVV, Mr. Geert Wilders' party, manages to win, that still doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And the people don't know about this because they don't know anything about how power works. They don't know anything about Gramsci. They don't know anything about staatsinrichting, as we would say it. So yeah, it's just like you're waving a flag in front of a bull, and the bull comes, and then what? You have nothing. It's air.
Yeah, and sadly is that whenever we try to talk about things like this, you know, how Gramsci envisioned things like, you know, cultural hegemony and whatnot, and how non-collectivist people should indeed strive to establish these kinds of underground network and slowly build up and, you know, change the cultural hegemony. Whenever I speak about these things, I'm called a loon and a conspiracist.
You should speak about it more and more because it's true.
What?
It's true. You should speak about this more and more because it's true. It's just
it is true, but I'm always called a loon or a conspiracist, even though this is how you do it. That's how you actually gain power, by slowly and gradually establishing cultural hegemony. That's how cultural Marxists won. That's how we will win, if we will ever be willing to start actually thinking about these things.
And if willing to unite, but the problem of libertarians and objectivists and whatnot is that they're complete individualists, and it's very difficult for them to unite and to ally with each other. That's part of the problem. Whereas the left is always marching closed ranks, you know, international, one for all, each for one, and things like that. And everyone here wants to invent the wheel on his own. You know, it's not going to work that way.
Not only that, but
the organization.
True, but not only that, but the left is willing to somehow oversee some of its internal disagreements, because the left isn't really that unified. But when it comes to things that matter, to pushing a policy or things like that, they are willing to unite various factions of the left and oversee some of their disagreements, at least for a while, until they get the policy that they want. Whereas on the non-collectivist aisle, there's always, oh, I'm not going to ally with that guy because he believes abortion should be illegal. And I'm like, I don't give a shit. What I do care is about this particular policy. Let's say, for instance, I don't know.
Hegemony.
For instance, let's say we fight for lower taxes. Now, look, when it comes to fighting for lower taxes, I will fight alongside with people with whom I may disagree on a lot of other points. We don't tend to have this on the non-collectivist side on the non-collectivist aisle of the spectrum. When it comes to policies, we don't really make a more common front. We always have these kinds of things. Oh, well, I'm not going to fight with that guy because he's an objectivist and I don't like Ayn Rand, or I'm not going to fight alongside with that guy because he believes gay marriage is good, or things like that. When it's usually about issues that have nothing to do with objectivism or gay marriage.
Divide and conquer. That's how Caesar said it, and that's how it's happening today. We've not advanced at all since the Roman Empire.
Pretty much. All right. Again, I have failed to finish an episode in a more positive note, but well, tough luck. Thanks a lot, Sid, for coming to my show, and I don't know, good luck in your career. You're still at the beginning. I really hope we'll be able to speak again, several months from now, and you'll be able to bring in some progress, some good news.
It was a pleasure. Yeah. Well, we'll see forward and see what happens.
Yeah, it's going to be a very tough summer, that's for sure. Once the cold wears out and we're going to start having more warmer weather in Europe, things are going to get really hot politically. You know that, I know that. It's going to be a very interesting 2016.
Yeah.
All right. Then, with that being said, thank you all for watching. But just as a reminder, these kinds of interviews are possible thanks, at least in part, to one of the latest sponsors of this channel, Crypto Compare. Don't forget to visit cryptocompare.com. It's also one of the ways to avoid the control of the state, using alternative currencies. And with that being said, thank you all for watching, and see you again on Friday when we have Judgy Bitch on Freedom Alternative Interviews. Goodbye, everyone.